I actually have a similar question about Afghanistan, that given that we now have more of a picture of what the Taliban is doing, reflecting on your story, the other women's story, how do you feel about it now, Anand? Would you have changed it in any way? Do you feel you struck the right balance in terms, in a sense, it wasn't a balance because you weren't choosing, whether it was the Taliban or the US that did this damage, but how did you feel in terms of getting the right tone for that piece?
Yeah, I think I wasn't surprised by the subsequent events. And the piece even talks about how
it does.
Taliban don't offer much to people except that it's not a war. And so I think, and in terms of balance, and in one way, it's not a balanced piece because it's only telling the story of those who are living in the war zone, which is only part of it, right? Is a whole other story to be told, but the thing is, I think it has been told and told well by many people. So I saw the piece itself as kind of contributing to a larger balance, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Our understanding.
I have another question. What drives you, Anand, to go into the most dangerous places in the world?
Well, I don't like danger. I'm not an adrenaline junkie or anything like that. Like I'm sometimes with photographers and they love to go right in between the bullets, and I'm not actually like that. I'm interested in the sorts of things that the sorts of human experiences that could be translatable for us as Americans. I'm very much interested in writing as an American. So when we think about conflict, we've had one idea of what America means in the world and what American war means in the world. And I thought it was pretty urgent for us as American citizens and Americans in general to understand what our role in the world is. And so that's part of what drives me. And then in terms of the work in the Arab world, we see what's happening with democracy in our country in the last few years. And I am driven by people's experimentations with democracy. My book now, current book, is about that. I'm driven by people's attempts to imagine different ways of living, and because I think we need that. And Chris, to talk about your question of hope, I think that, whereas the war is a kind of a sober assessment of what our country's role has been. I mean, looking at democracy, whether failed democracy experiments or successful ones, is to just towards how we can try to have a little bit of hope in what I think a lot of us agree is kind of dark times.
I have the next question. How do you juggle your work as a professor and a journalist? And what advice do you have for younger journalists who wants to cover international stories? I'm currently working at a local paper and received a grant for an investigative story abroad. I'll be taking unpaid leave to go work on it. It would be useful to hear more from you about how you manage it all.
Well, my main advice for if you want to work internationally is to try to learn the language if the place you're going to doesn't speak English as the primary language, and to try as much as possible to develop a sort of expertise in a way. And it's a little different from how we're normally taught about journalism, I think, where we tend to see ourselves as kind of these sort of neutral, objective truth tellers who are going to go and get the opinions of various experts who studied this and know this better than us. But I think actually, if you really try to study a particular issue, it'll help your journalism tremendously. I mean, I can't tell you how many times where I've been in a situation where I would ask a question, like in the Other Afghan Women, there's a warlord named Amir Dado, and the women that I interviewed initially talked about him. Right. So like they told me other parts of their lives. It just because I happen to have studied this area and read everything about the area and realized there is a warlord by this name, I asked them, and then all these stories came out about, so it's a lot of it's about knowing what's the right questions to ask. And that really means having a kind of expertise, like really doing your homework and really trying to read everything that's been written academically and journalistically so that you feel like you're asking the right questions. And then the other part of the question was about how I balance being a professor, a journalist. Well,
yes, and a journalist.
Mostly by not writing very much, I guess. I write one article every couple of years at this point, but that's a pace that's good for me, I think. And the good thing about being professors, I get healthcare, So that's the main reason. So.
Yeah. Do your journalistic and academic publications, do they sort of draw on the same material, or do you, or is that separate? Does your work dovetail in that sense?
Oh, it definitely dovetails. I'm always drawing from one or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. While waiting for more questions, I'd like to ask, Anand, how did you get into narrative writing in particular? As in, was it something that you studied? Did you teach yourself? I mean, I'm always interested in how people get into this kind of writing and essentially how they learn it and practice it.
Well, I used to read Harper's, actually. It's true. I think when I was a physicist, I think Harper's was one of the few magazines I subscribed to. And
that's great.
Yeah, so I was moved by various, or you're moved by good writing, or you're moved by good storytelling. And so I was moved by various, I can mention if people are interested, examples of great writing and storytelling, and so I thought, oh, I should try to do that. But that's where that's the genesis of it.
Oh, okay. And
actually, I'm curious, like, you don't have to name names, but were you primarily excited by conflict journalism, or by nature writing, or like political pieces? Like, what were the things that were sort of
everything? I mean, I liked all sorts of good writing, but yeah, conflict journalism. When I wanted to be a conflict journalist, that's what I was looking to almost as a model. But no, some of my favorite pieces from various magazines. I mean, there's like Catherine Brew has a piece called The Marriage Cure. I don't know if you remember that from a few years ago. So the thing is, like, I read that piece and I was like, wow, I want to do what she does. This is an amazing piece. So there's lots of examples, like Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc's book, Random Family, as an example of great narrative writing. There's a lot out there, and so these aren't conflict based.
Right, but they still, in the chat, we have a couple of links to Anand's New Yorker piece and also to Anand's Harper piece. Let me ask, are there any other questions at this point? Okay, sounds like people aren't sending this in. So Chris, how did you get involved in this kind of work?
Well, I definitely came at it from the literary side of things. My first job was at the Paris Review, and I edited fiction there, also poetry. And it was only when I arrived at Harper's that I sort of got thrown into working more directly with journalism. Although I will say that when I was at Paris Review, the head of that publication was Philip Gurevich, who is a fantastic journalist and reported from Rwanda and many other places around the world. So I was sort of steeped in some of that writing through him. But yeah, I mean, my original life plan was to become an academic, and then got this, what I thought was going to be like a one-year job at Paris Review, and just really loved being involved so directly with writing every day that I quickly decided that I was not going to go back to academia. So I was on leave from a PhD, and I never went back, and I don't regret that either. I've been glad to. History.
I think we are about up to our time. So let me ask whether we have anybody else who's interested. Do we have any other questions? But also, Anand and Chris, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? And Anand, I am curious, so you're working on a book now, and is your book set in a particular place, or if it is essentially about democracy, is it based on reporting in different places? I mean, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, this is a book about a city that overthrew the government and had an 18-month experiment in democracy, which took place in Syria.
Okay.
And Syria is a dictatorship for 40 years. There was just state-run newspapers, all unions and political parties were banned. And so in this 18-month period, all of a sudden you had this effervescence of political parties, 11 different newspapers conservative, left-wing, Islamist, everything secular. The city was governed by a Senate and councils. It was, I think, one of the most fully realized democratic experiments in recent times, not just in Syria, but probably anywhere. And it failed after 18 months. So the book is really about how this experiment came together, why it failed, and what lessons that might give us about democracy today.
Okay. And have you thought about where your next trip would be, or what reporting you might do next?
Well, I'm a little bit tired of doing conflict reporting and foreign reporting, so I'm looking for stories that are closer to home, perhaps, or in Europe. I would definitely go on assignment to Europe if anybody wants to.
It's always Ukraine.
No, except for Ukraine. Sorry. Anywhere in Western Europe. I'll go anywhere in Western Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I
Time
think
to report that Hawaii story.
I'll definitely report a Hawaii story.
Yeah.
I think our time is up. So if anyone has any other questions, please do send them along or ask. And otherwise, thank you very much to Anand and to Chris. We really appreciate you being here, and thank you for your thoughtful insights. This has been a very interesting conversation. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.